part of what helped me get through it, I wanted to feel the satisfaction of being successful in my life in spite of all these people. That was kind of my ultimate revenge. Just like, I'm going to live and I'm going to be loved by somebody and I'm going to have a great career. And I'm going to do all of this in spite of all of you people telling me that no one will ever love me, that I'm worthless.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. In each episode, an atheist or agnostic shares their story of deconversion from Christianity. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 82. Today I speak with Bella. Bella starts the interview today by saying that Christianity ruined their childhood. They were born into a Catholic family and went to church every Saturday. They became aware they were non-binary at 6 years old, realizing they didn't want to be a girl. Their parents were caring and the type of people that you wish Christians were. Despite a loving home environment, this didn't prevent a childhood of isolation and self-hatred. They were bullied, abused, and suicidal. Somehow, they remained a hardcore Christian. Later in life, they experience abuse in romantic relationships. In college, they leave Catholicism for non-denominational Christianity. Processing their grandmother's death leads to panic attacks and motivates them to read the Bible. It's immediately obvious to them that the Bible is, in their words, dark fiction. They eventually get mental health help and in 2019 decide they are no longer a Christian. They are now atheist. It was a wonderful interview, so inspiring, and they were just a wonderful person to speak with. So without any further ado, here's my interview with Bella. Well, I'd like to welcome Bella to the podcast today. Bella, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so now that you're not a Christian, how do you like to spend your Sundays?
Well, I never really did spend Sundays in church because we went to a Saturday service.
Oh, okay. So maybe how do you spend your Saturdays now?
Watching TV, playing video games.
That sounds like a good alternative to church.
Yeah, definitely.
That's cool. All right. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background? Tell me how Christianity influenced you in your childhood.
I like to say that Christianity ruined my childhood.
Yeah.
I was born into a Catholic family, and I was baptized Catholic, and then I was sent to a Catholic school. And at a young age, that just kind of derailed my whole lifetime happiness.
Wow. So just put you on like a pretty negative trajectory.
Yeah, I didn't really have a chance to have a positive relationship with God.
Wow. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your experience in the church. Like, what are some of your earliest memories around being a Christian or the church or?
Well, my earliest memories were probably when I was really little, like 4 or 5. And I know a lot of other people who share their stories on here, their parents were a strong influence on how Christianity was kind of negative for them. But for me, my parents were actually a very positive influence. They would just kind of tell me like Bible stories, and for me, it would be no different than like when you read a Dr. Seuss book to a kid. It was kind of like, oh, this is a cool story. Like the Noah's Ark story, that was cool to me. And so I didn't think deeply about it, but most of the indoctrination that was negative happened once I started going to school.
Interesting. So your parents actually were a positive force in your life.
Yes.
Yeah. And you said you started to go to Catholic school at a young age?
Yeah.
Okay. And was that like elementary school when you started going? Okay.
Yeah, I went there from preschool through 3rd grade.
Oh, okay. And you had mentioned when we had emailed a little bit that some of the staff were abusive. Is that when that happened, when you were in that at that age group?
Yes.
Okay. So is that something you want to talk about or share at all? Your
Yeah.
experience with that? If you feel comfortable, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most of it started in kindergarten. Pretty much from day one, I was singled out as the kid that was going to be bullied. So I started getting bullied from a lot of the kids. They made fun of my name. They made fun of my ethnicity. Even though it was a predominantly white school, everyone there was Polish, and I was the only Hungarian kid. And so apparently that was funny to them. And
Interesting.
anytime I would try to seek help from an adult, it was always just ignore it, walk away. Even when the bullying was physical, they didn't step in.
So the teachers, the adults in the school were not stopping it. They were just putting it on you to stop it, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, they literally did not care.
Wow.
And the school was so poor that some of the parents were like volunteer recess teachers. So, of course, when they know it was their kids that were bullying other kids, they weren't going to do anything about it. They didn't discipline them, nothing.
Wow. So, and that started, you said, pretty early on when you first started going there in preschool.
Yeah,
Wow,
literally from the first day of
that's
school.
crazy. So that's terrible. So, and you said that your name is your name Hungarian?
My last name is, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the time, why did you stop going to Catholic school in third grade?
So, I stopped going because my mom kind of figured out what was going on at the school.
Yeah.
And also, the school ended up shutting down after that because of low enrollment.
Oh.
So, that was my ticket to go to public school.
So, yeah. So, were you pretty happy about that? Do you remember how you felt?
Yeah, I was thrilled.
Yeah.
I felt free, but I also felt terrified.
Yeah. What was terrifying about it to you?
At that point, I had such deep trust issues with people that I was too afraid to even make friends at my new school. I was too afraid to talk to people.
Yeah.
My experiences in my early childhood to this day have left me pretty emotionally stunted in terms of it's very hard for me to be affectionate towards people. It's very hard for me to talk a lot of times.
Yeah.
Deep social anxiety.
Did you open up? I know you were pretty young when this was all happening at Catholic school, but did you open up to your parents very much during that time to let them know what was happening?
I tried to. So it's actually pretty fucked up in the sense that the school lied to my parents about what was going on. They fed them this idea that I was this troublemaker kid who was getting in fights and misbehaving in class. And so, when you're a kid and you're like, Mom, I didn't do it, like, who are you going to believe as a parent? You're going to believe the teacher who's saying, yeah, they weren't behaving in school.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah,
I
the
was older,
adult.
I tried. Yeah. And when I was older, I tried to talk to my mom about what happened, and she just blamed herself for everything. And she felt terrible. And it's kind of too hard for me to tell her.
That's hard because then, you have your own pain around it, but then you don't want to cause her pain. So it
Yeah.
makes it really difficult, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know, they were just trying to do the right thing. And
Yeah.
parents don't always do it right.
Yeah. Maybe well-intentioned, or they made a bad call by trusting the teachers. In that case, maybe the teachers were really convincing, or your parents just thought for some reason that, oh, maybe it's not as bad as it sounds or something, but it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So in Catholic church, or in Catholic school, was there a lot of theology, or was there a lot of, did they talk about religion a lot during school, or was it just
Hmm.
basically like you had one religion course or class or something? I know you were young, so it's probably all the same teacher or something, or yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, they kind of taught us from a young age self-hatred in the sense of everything is a sin. If you misbehave, that's a sin. If you do this, that's a sin. If you think something, that's a sin.
Sounds very Catholic.
So very Catholic, and it feels like nothing you do is right or good enough.
Yeah.
Um, we did go to like church as a school every Tuesday,
Okay.
and then there was also religion class as well.
Yeah. So
They
you had,
also taught lots of misogyny.
oh,
You
so what,
know, it's okay for
yeah.
boys to do everything. It's not okay for girls to do this stuff.
So yeah, that's seems like an intrinsic part of Christianity, and some churches emphasize that stuff more than others. And so it's,
Yeah,
yeah, it sounds terrible. So what was you said that you never really had a personal relationship or connection with God in the sense of some real evangelical people sometimes have that kind of a thing. How would you have
I
described
didn't
your,
have,
yeah,
well, it wasn't a positive one, I guess.
yeah,
God was, to me, was kind of like this person who was punishing me and I didn't know why. And a lot of times when I would try to seek help for a lot of the bullying happening at school, a lot of the other answers I would get from people are, well, this is God's way of testing you. And, um, you've committed some kind of sin. And if you just, start obeying God, it's all going to stop. Or if you pray enough, it's going to stop. Or if you give it
yeah,
to God, he's going to take it away. And no matter how much I prayed or how much I tried to behave myself and not sin,
yeah.
um, it didn't seem to change the situation.
He was,
And
yeah. Go ahead.
and so God just to me seemed like this person who was punishing me for no reason.
Okay, it was the angry God in the sky who's waiting to just like thrust the lightning bolt down and like judgment, all of the time.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that. You mentioned the feelings of being judgmental towards others, like where you were kind of taught to think in those terms. Is that
yeah,
a good way of thinking about it? Okay. Yeah, so you were being judged. You were taught as a school, as a class, to judge others in a strict kind
yeah,
of way. Yeah.
yeah. Especially anyone who was LGBT, um, women, and it was very difficult for me because at a young age I knew I didn't want to be a girl,
Mm,
and at the time in the 90s, there wasn't a whole lot of terminology like we have now, or at least it wasn't as well known as it is today.
yeah.
So I grew up, a non-binary individual in a culture that hated me
Mm,
and told me that no, you can't like anything the boys like because that's sinful. You can't cut your hair short because you look like a boy and you're supposed to look like a girl.
mm,
Uh, Girls were forbidden to wear pants on church days. So we had to wear
it's
dresses or
very
skirts, and I hated it.
traditional. Yeah, it was not, it wasn't you.
No.
Yeah. Wow. So that's really complicated for a young person to, I imagine, have those feelings and know what to do with them, especially in such a traditional society, and
Yes.
and not just society, but like specifically your sphere of like friends and family and everything was all very traditional. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, at the very least, though, like my family, they're the type of Christians that we wish Christians were. Very accepting and loving of all people. This church, however, just was not.
Yeah. When did you start having feelings? I think you just mentioned it, but maybe I didn't catch it. How old were you when you started realizing that you weren't, maybe you said non-binary. So when did you realize you didn't fit into a typical box like society has, or category?
I was 6.
Okay, so quite young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that made it really hard to go through those years, those early years, especially at the Catholic school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So how did things progress for you as you went into public school? Talk about how you were feeling and what was your experience in public school after you got out of the Catholic school?
It started out okay, but because I isolated myself, I started getting bullied in public school, though not anywhere close to the extent at my Catholic school.
Okay, so bullying continued, but it was less severe, perhaps,
Yeah.
reinforcing these feelings that you had of, I can't trust people. I'm not going to
Yeah.
open up to people. Yeah. And you said that you didn't really go to church a lot. Let's see. So did your family go to church much when you were this age as you got into public school?
So, yeah, when I was going to Catholic school, we went every Saturday.
Okay.
And after my mom found out the truth of what happened at the school, we stopped going to that church altogether.
Hmm. Okay. And did your family decide to go to another church?
They both stopped going to church. They've
Okay.
not set foot in a church since.
So what happened to you was the reason they stopped going to church, or one of the
Yeah.
reasons? Wow.
I
So
would
it,
think probably the main reason, yeah.
wow. Did you open up to your parents about how you were feeling in terms of the non-binary stuff?
That one is a little hard for me because even though they're pretty non-judgmental, they don't really understand like trans people or non-binary people. Like
Yeah.
they can't really separate what they've learned their whole life about gender roles and just what a person's sex is.
Mm. So they're still old-fashioned in their thinking, but they're very kind people, it sounds like.
Yeah,
They just have a hard time understanding.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the family stops going to church, and then how does this impact your feeling about yourself in terms of Christianity? Did you still consider yourself a Christian at that age?
Yeah, like very hardcore.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
tell me about it. Tell me why. Yeah, explain kind of what that was like for you.
So the Catholic Church always indoctrinates you heavily into this idea of hell and it being a very real place. And so that was something from a young age that fear I was indoctrinated with. And
Yeah.
they also don't really believe, or at least their idea of salvation is not like the evangelicals. It's not like, oh, you just need to accept Jesus and you're saved for good. It's no, if you mess up, you're going to go to hell until you confess and ask forgiveness. So anytime you sin, you're supposed to repent. And so, of course, like me being the imperfect person I was always making mistakes. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to go to hell. Um, it's actually in a twisted way that fear of hell that actually saved my life when I was younger.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
there was a point where I did try to kill myself.
Mm.
And I remembered that, oh, if you kill yourself, you go to hell. So I can't do that.
Wow.
So that actually did save my life, but it also just made me really hate myself because I'm like, well, every time I make a mistake, I'm not going to make it to heaven.
Meaning if you took your own life, you wouldn't get to heaven, or do you mean if you make any mistake, now
Like any
God's counting
mistake.
that against you again?
Yeah, any
Okay.
mistake.
So you had a very strong sense of God's keeping score of
Yes.
everything.
Of every little thing, every
Wow.
thought, every word, every action.
Did your parents know how seriously you took these beliefs?
I think to a degree they did, yeah.
Yeah. And how about your feelings, your suicidal feelings and thoughts? Did your parents have any idea that that was going on?
No.
No. It was very
Um,
internal.
yeah. My church did not believe in any way about mental illness or getting help for mental illness. If you had a mental illness, it's because you were sinning and it's spiritual and you have to work on your relationship with God and you don't need help.
Yeah.
Their idea of help is like go to a priest who's basically going to tell you to pray, and that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Um, I actually did talk to my priest when I was in the second grade about I wish I never existed and how much I hated myself and how much pain I was in and how much I prayed all the time, and it didn't take it away.
That's very sad to think of an 7 or 8 year old person going through that kind of thing, feeling those feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how old were you? You mentioned you thought about taking your own life. How old were you at that point?
I was uh, probably 7 when I first started thinking that I didn't want to live
Wow.
anymore.
Wow.
I
Okay.
think the first time I recall being depressed, I was 5 and I was in kindergarten.
Wow. So this is like something that's, yeah, been really hard for you to work with or work through basically your whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you get older, does anything change, or do you can continue in these feelings of self-hatred um, and just feeling so judged by God? And did this just continue into your teen years?
Yeah, it continued into my early adulthood.
Yeah. So up to that point, and we'll talk about how things change for you, but up to that point, what else is important for people to know about your story?
So, um, when I started getting bullied, it was, of course, just the name calling. And then it escalated to physical attacks. People would throw basketballs and things at my head and my face. People tried choking me. People tried breaking my arms. Bullying even escalated to like sexual bullying, like bullying me because I'm a woman and I don't have guy parts. And my hair is short, so I look like a boy, and all this type of thing. And then the teachers, in a way, egged it on because when I did ask for help, it was, well, you just need to ignore it. You just need to walk away. You're not helping yourself by yelling back at them. And if I did finally reach a breaking point and stick up for myself, whether that be pushing somebody back or yelling at them, they would immediately send me to like the principal's office and call my mom and made it seem like I was this troublemaker kid.
Yeah.
The school really loved humiliation as a form of punishment. So if you like messed up at recess, if you got in trouble, they made you stand against the wall. So you'd have to watch everybody else have fun. But then everybody else, if they saw you against the wall, knew that you were in trouble.
So this was the
And
public
so,
school.
no, this was the Catholic
Okay, the
school.
Catholic school. Yeah, they were very
Yeah.
okay.
And the bullying at times even like happened during class. Like people like throwing pieces of paper or spitballs or whatever, name calling. And of course, this happened right in front of teachers, and they did nothing. So I ended up trying to like escape during class. Like I would go to the bathroom and I'd say, hey, I need a bathroom break. And I'd spend a long time in there because it was like a moment of solace that I could just like be left alone and not be around people. And because of that, they stopped letting me use the bathroom for the entirety of the school day,
Oh my
every single day.
gosh. They saw
Um,
it as you abusing the privilege, but you were trying to find peace.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so even if it was like legitimate, they never let me. It was never like oh, well, you only have 2 minutes. It was more of a, no, you just can't ever use the bathroom.
Wow.
So there were many times as a young kid, you can't hold it forever. So you have an accident and then they just didn't care.
Yeah. So what about in the public school? Did things as you got into high school, did this all just kind of continued in some form?
Yeah, not so much like with strict Catholicism per se. I still considered myself a Christian, and I still intended on like going and getting my confirmation. But I wasn't going to church at that point, and because of that, I was like obsessed with like, oh, I'm going to go to hell because I'm not going to church.
Mm,
And I also ended up having very homophobic views because of what I learned from the Catholic Church.
mm,
Um,
interesting.
in my hometown, the suburb I grew up in, by nature was already pretty homophobic. That was just the attitude of the people. So it
Yeah.
was really scary for kids that were not straight. They would usually get like physically beaten, a lot of slurs said regularly by people, and it was seen as normal.
Mm. And do you still live in the general area that you grew up in?
Close to it, yeah.
Close to it, yeah. As you get older, did you start to have you had a lot of Catholic guilt? I'm gathering that that's pretty clear, and that's something I feel like Catholics talk about a lot, and the fear of hell. These are themes I've heard from other former Catholics. So you're carrying all of this weight with you, all of these judgmental feelings and all of this fear. When did you start to doubt?
I started questioning things in high school. Um, so when I had first gone to Catholic school, one of the first friends I made was a Muslim. And of course, you're told that, only Christians go to heaven, and only this brand of Christianity is the one true religion. As a young kid, I didn't really understand that. So I ended up making friends with people who were not Christian. And they ended up being really wonderful people. And I was interested in their culture and wanting to learn more about it. And then as I got older, like in high school, I started understanding, like, oh, so everybody who doesn't believe or isn't a Catholic is going to go to hell. And I'm like, that just seems like a lot of people. And wouldn't God want more people to go to heaven than hell? Or what if there's like a terrible person who's a Catholic, but there's a great person who's a Muslim? Wouldn't he want the better of the two people to go to heaven?
Yeah.
To me, that would make more moral sense. Um, like, wasn't Hitler a Catholic? So why would he get to go to heaven? Like,
Yeah. So that's when you started to doubt, and that was when you were making friends with people who weren't Catholic, and
yeah,
you seemed like you were somebody who was viewed people in a kind way. You didn't look at people in terms of, you know, are they like me? In other words, the friend's Muslim, and that doesn't matter to you. Just if they're a nice person and they're your friend, they're your friend.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really strive to try to treat better than I was treated.
To treat
Um,
people better than you were treated.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I've always been a very empathetic person, and a lot of my friends I ended up making were kids that were also made fun of because I understood their pain, and
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I can get you, and it didn't really matter to me whether they were a Christian or not.
Yeah. That's it's so hard for kids to go through things like that. To the bullying, and um, it really can it really impacts your sense of self worth, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what made you leave or stop identifying as a Catholic?
Um, so there's all these sacraments you got to go through if you're in the Catholic Church. The first one being baptism, and then there's communion and reconciliation. And I got to the age where I was supposed to be confirmed, which is their version of accepting Jesus. And at that point, I wasn't really going to church anymore. I wasn't active in any parish, and it's really hard to join a parish. It's not just like oh, I'm going to just start going to this church. You have to like donate money to the church. You have to donate time to the church and volunteer. You have to
Interesting.
be there like every single Saturday or Sunday for like a certain amount of time before they consider you a member.
And you can't be
And
confirmed unless you're a member?
yeah, you can't be
Wow.
confirmed unless you're a member. And then you have to take like a class about it. And at that point, I'm like, well, I'm in school, and I just had too many other things going on in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I also just wasn't really sure I wanted to still be Catholic, because I really associated that with my past trauma and never being good enough and hating myself all the time. And I didn't really want to feel that way. I'm like, I still want, I want to view God positively, and I wanted to
Yeah.
try to have a positive experience with Christianity. And I felt like I wasn't going to be able to do that if I stayed Catholic.
Okay. And you said this is when you were in school, meaning college?
I was in high school, and then college is when I made the final decision
Okay.
not to be Catholic.
Yeah. So you basically were just saying that you were busy with your studies. You were busy, you know, trying to get good
Yeah,
grades in school and not, you didn't
yeah,
have time to go, invest in a church and all to just get confirmed. So your feeling
yeah,
was, what's the point of going through all this? I don't have time for that. And maybe I don't want to be Catholic because look at how I was treated growing up. That's not something I
yeah.
want for my life.
No.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you get introduced to a non-denominational church? That's quite different, very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a friend who I did go to high school with, and she went to the same college as me. We were both in marching band together, and she was really involved in this non-denominational church that was pretty close to where I lived at the time. And so she invited me to go to this event with her, and it was this like salvation event where they
Mm,
wanted a whole bunch of people to accept Jesus. So I did it, at that church, and I decided to start going to that church and being fairly active.
okay, so it was through a friend that introduced you to this. Sounds like it was a revival meeting of some kind or a big,
Yeah,
yeah, they were trying to bring in the lost and like people who are not Christian. What's funny is a lot of non-denominational churches view Catholics as not Christian.
yeah, this one definitely
Yeah,
hated Catholics.
so they love it when Catholics come and and convert to a different to their form of Christianity. Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
those vibes and those feelings and those thoughts because I went to several non-denominational churches in my high school years. I went to church like a lot, like not just my home church, but I would go midweek. I'd go to a different church, and a lot of them were non-denominational, and those feelings are pretty common, I think, in non-denominational evangelical churches. Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, so how does this change your faith? Going from Catholic to non-denominational, how does this? You said you went forward and accepted Jesus at this church.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so how does this change your faith?
Um, at the time, I felt really happy and really relieved. I'm like, wow, so like that's really all it took for me to be saved and go to heaven is like, oh, just saying I accept Jesus. It's that easy. When my whole life I was taught like, no, every time you make a mistake, if you tell a lie or if you say in your head that you hate this person, you're going to go right to hell. So instead of having to try so hard to be perfect and be somebody I wasn't, I could just be myself and just say, yeah, I accepted Jesus. And so it felt like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders.
That's good. So that was a good transition for you, a good kind of a good evolution of your faith. It was becoming more compassionate and you were able to not feel so much guilt and weight all the time, judgmental
Yeah,
weight on your shoulders.
yeah,
Yeah. So did you go to church regularly after that?
I did.
Okay. And with this friend, or did you have other people that you like to attend with, or did you just go on your own?
My friend went, and then a couple other people from my high school who I knew went. And all
Okay.
of us were in bands, so we all knew each other.
Okay. Cool. So you had a kind of a group of friends. So it seems like this group of friends was a positive force in your life.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
were.
that's cool. So did you just go to this church during your high school years? And then when did you stop going to that church?
Well, I started in college, and then
Okay.
I stopped like like not much over a year after I started.
Oh, that's pretty quick. So when you said you were
Yeah.
in band together, you mean like the college band?
No, we were in high school
Oh, you
band,
knew each other from
but
high
we
school
all,
band, but you started to go
yeah,
to
yeah,
college when, okay. So you knew each other from high school, basically. That's what you were
yeah.
saying. Gotcha. Okay. So you start going in college with your friend, and it feels really refreshing and really great. It's a huge weight lifted off your shoulders. But then a year later, you stop going. So what was the reason behind that?
That was like a multitude of reasons. I was in a really abusive relationship when I started going to that church. I was engaged to a narcissist who actually hated Christians. He was
Weird.
very much, yeah, he was an atheist, and I really attribute
That's so
my
weird.
ending up,
He
yeah,
hates Christians and he's with you and you were Christian.
yeah,
Yeah, that's not
yeah.
a good recipe. Yeah.
No, and I think
Yeah.
he decided to hate them more because he knew it would hurt me, and he liked hurting me in any way he could. So I really attribute Christianity in teaching me self-hatred as the reason why I ended up in a lot of abusive relationships, because I essentially was just picking people who were treating me the way I felt about myself, and I hated myself, so I picked people that hated me.
Yeah, it primed you for these kinds of relationships. It sounds
Yeah.
like. Yeah.
So I ended up yeah, it was kind of complicated. Like I started going to that church, and at first it was like this positive message of, yep, that's all it takes and you're saved, and they had all the cool non-traditional hymns, and it seemed like just a really friendly group of people. But then the message kind of started changing, and it was like, well, no, really, that's not all it takes for you to be saved. Like,
Okay.
you also have to, like, be at church every single Sunday, and if you stop going to church, you're in jeopardy of losing your relationship with God, and you can't, have sex before marriage. You can't, you have to separate yourself from everything of the world, but still be part of the world somehow, which makes no sense.
No
Like,
sense.
how can I completely ban myself from watching every movie ever and reading every book that isn't the Bible and
Yeah.
listening to any non-Christian music? Like, what if you're just out somewhere and somebody's blaring a rap music with a whole bunch of swear words in it, but you're not the one playing it?
Yeah.
But because you heard it, now you're part of the world, and okay, now you're not really saved.
Yeah. The non-denominational folks can be just as judgmental as Catholics, but it wasn't apparent at first.
Yeah, and in some weird ways, it seemed like they were at least on par with, or even more in some ways. Like,
Yeah.
of course, they started with the whole, yeah, these Catholics, they're not really Christian. And all, if you know anyone who's a Catholic, you really need to try to convince them to join this church because this is the only right church. And only people from, only non denominational evangelicals are going to heaven. And so now they're asking me to question whether or not my parents are going to be going to hell, and virtually every other person I love, because I had family who are Pentecostals and Presbyterians and Lutherans
Yeah.
and all sorts of different denominations. I'm like, now you really expect me to think all these people who like devote their lives to God are
Yeah.
going to hell because they don't go to this church?
Wow.
I just found that to be extremely problematic.
Yeah, and so it was the theology and the doctrine of that church that drove you away from it.
Yeah, and they didn't believe that my baptism was genuine because it was an infant baptism.
Right.
So
That's
if I
very
wanted to
Protestant.
join the church, I would have had to become rebaptized and take this class. And um, so I took the class, but I didn't get rebaptized. And um, it's pretty much after I took that membership class that I kind of stopped.
Okay. So you actually took a baptism class at the church.
Yeah, it was like a membership.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it was a
Kind of both.
like a membership application class thing. It was weird.
Okay. Yeah. So, and after you go through this membership class, that's when you realize this isn't for me. I'm out.
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
really big into missions,
That sounds about right.
and I never really agreed with that. Even though Catholics have definitely had their hands dirty so far as missions go all
Yeah.
over the world, I always found that to be wrong. Like, to me, it's very pretentious. Like, who do you think you are going to somebody else's country and telling them that they're savage and they're going to hell and they need to believe what you believe and they're just a
Right.
terrible person for existing? It
Yeah.
would be like somebody coming into your house and like telling you what you can and can't eat, and you can only watch TV at this time, and I need the shower at 9 a.m. every day. Like, it makes no
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. You're imposing your beliefs and your lifestyle on people who may not want that.
Yeah,
They're perfectly
exactly.
happy, the way they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were your parents' thoughts about you going to a non-denominational church?
They were very accepting.
Okay.
Yeah, they were happy that I found a church that seemed to work for me.
And how did you break off the relationship with this boyfriend? How did that happen?
Uh, well, we were together for 3 years, and I broke it off over the phone. I and I'm glad I did because
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been safe any other way.
Yeah, that's good. It's scary when someone's abused, like physically abusive or could be
He
physically
wasn't
abusive.
so much physically abusive, but very psychologically, and he was really pressuring me at the time to move in with him and get married right away. And I was still in school and only working a part-time job that paid like crap. And I'm like, well, and he lived in a town that was almost an hour away. I'm
Oh,
like, so how do you
wow.
expect me to like leave my life?
Right.
I don't own a car. How would I go to school? How would I go to work? And he just didn't seem to care. And
Yeah, it doesn't care.
obviously, he wanted me to move because then I would be completely isolated from
Yeah.
everybody.
That seems like a pretty classic abusive person move where they try to separate you from other people and they're not really logical about, they're not being reasonable, about
No.
like, hey, this is not going to work for my work, my day-to-day life and everything. Yeah, he just wanted to isolate you. So that's good. So you were able to break that off. Was that when were you still going to the non-denominational church when that happened?
I was, yeah.
Okay, so you broke it off with him and then you eventually leave the non-denominational church. Do you go to a different church after that or do you just take some time to not go to church for a while? How do you proceed from there?
Yeah, I pretty much stopped going to church. There was maybe like two other times I went back to that church just to go to church, and I have not gone to church since.
Okay. So, when did the real doubts start for you when you began to doubt belief in God a little more seriously? Because you had some doubts, but yeah, did that happen at the same time as you leaving this church, or did you start to have more doubts later?
I think that kind of got the ball rolling a little bit, but then there were some major events in my life that really pushed me
Okay.
um, to stop believing.
And what were some of those things that happened?
So about a year after I left my abusive ex, I started dating this guy who was a very fundamentalist, apostolic Christian. And pretty early on in the relationship, he told me that he believes women should be submissive to men. Um, my hair was pretty much like this length at the time. It was pretty long, and he was like, "Oh, it should be longer. Women should never cut their hair, and women shouldn't wear pants."
Yeah, your hair's
And
about shoulder. It's a little longer than shoulder length. Is that?
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So he wanted it to be longer because he was a fundamentalist, had weird
yeah,
beliefs. Yeah.
yeah. And that relationship ended pretty swiftly. He ended up raping me, and shortly after that, he broke up with me.
That's terrible. Like it just feels like you went from one like something bad to worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you get through that time? That must have been incredibly traumatic for you.
I did it on my own. I That kind of was a huge moment for me in questioning my beliefs because, of course, as we all know, Christians are extremely pro-life. And I was one of those people. Like, I was so pro-life. I believed that rape victims should, have their babies and just give them up for adoption. Like, because that's such an easy thing to go through, of course, which it's terrifying.
Right.
And when this happened, I didn't know if I was pregnant or not. And of course, having any kind of unplanned pregnancy or having sex before marriage is considered a huge sin and a huge no no. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what do I do? Like, I have no way of taking care of a kid. I don't even want a kid. I,
Yeah.
and, he won't be around if I were to keep a kid if this resulted. And so I
Yeah.
had to make a decision like, oh my gosh, like if I get pregnant because of this, I'm going to need an abortion because I cannot, like, it's either this or I kill myself.
Yeah.
And thank God it was not pregnant, but having to be in that position of thinking I might have to make that decision, it made me see just how flawed my beliefs were. I'm
Wow.
like, how could I have ever said this about other women who went through the same thing, that they should go through this probably the worst experience in their life and live with the consequence of that they did not inflict on themselves.
Wow. So going through this experience really opened your eyes to how complicated the issue was or is, this type of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Uh, and he stayed away after everything happened. He didn't try to get back in contact with you, or
No.
yeah. So that's really traumatic, and so that is something that caused a huge doubt in your mind about whether God existed, because maybe why didn't he protect you, or that kind of thing, or was it something
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, that was a huge thing.
Yeah.
One of the things I had been told by people my whole life, like when I would try to open up to them about bullying and about mental illness, um, it was always like this whole, well, God's testing your faith. And, you have to go through this now because in the future, God has this amazing plan for you and you're going to get, the best life ever. And you're going to get all these gifts from God because you were strong and you got through this. Or another popular one was like, God never gives you more than you could handle.
Yeah, I hate that one.
And at that point, I was like wondering, after 24 years of living, seemingly being tested by God since I was 6 years old, I'm like, how much more do I need to suffer for you to let me just live my life and be happy? Like, how much more do I need to go through before I can have some semblance of a normal life? Like, the thing that I really could not stand about church was I would see these people and they all looked happy all the time. And they had like this look on their face like their life was just effortless, and they would say all this bullshit like, oh yeah, I'm not afraid of dying and any of this because I trust God that much. And I'm like, wow, that must be so great for you that you have absolutely no adversity in your life. Like,
Yeah.
how is it that you got this lucky and nothing, no one tested you, but I'm getting tested left and right, and I still can't have this trust in God, and I can't have this effortless, like, happiness.
Wow. Yeah. It's so fake, you know, because I think even if, I think some of them probably are aware that they're not being completely honest by acting like everything's great all the time. But
Yeah,
some
there's
of
no
them are
way.
delusional. I think they are pretending that everything's great because they can't accept the fact that, you know, in their world, if they're a good Christian, their life should be good. God should be blessing
Yeah,
them. So they can't
yeah,
accept anything that's negative, you know. They
yeah,
pretend like it's great, but it's not,
yeah, and
maybe.
a lot of the another thing they like to put on you is when you try to open up about, yeah, I'm going through a difficult time. It's like, well, you're lucky because other people, other places have it worse than you. And it's almost like this whole, you're not allowed to have feelings about struggles in your life because somebody else somewhere has it worse.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I never claimed to have the worst life out of anybody, but I should be allowed to have feelings about things being done to me.
Yeah.
Like,
And be able to be affirmed in that and have someone say, that's really, I'm really sorry that happened. That's really terrible. You know, that must
yeah,
have been hard. I mean, these are the things,
yeah,
these are simple statements that can really go a long way.
yeah, just no empathy whatsoever.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was, and the other thing I would get told a lot was love your enemies. And it's like, oh, so I'm supposed to love the person who just tried to choke me to death. Like, why would I love that person? It really ingrained like a sense of worthlessness.
Mm,
Like, you're just supposed to let people abuse you and be okay with it because you're supposed to love your enemies because that's what God says you should do.
mm,
And if you don't love your enemies, if you hate those people, that's a sin. And that was one of the things I really struggled with as a Catholic is I was getting bullied all the time. You know, one person tried to kill me at school right in front of a recess supervisor. And when she saw it
wow.
and she did nothing to get this person to stop choking me. And she's like, well, you just should have ignored it. Like, you can just ignore somebody choking you. And then I would like be like, I hate these people. I hate them all. Like, they're just terrible. And well, you can't hate them. You know, you're supposed to love your enemies. If you hate them, that's a sin. So I'm like, why? It really kind of like conditioned me to think that abuse was normal and that my
Wow.
body wasn't mine and my life wasn't mine. I just existed to be a punching bag for other people.
Wow. Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about that, you know, rather than hate being, you know, the wrong response, hate seems to be pretty much the appropriate response in a situation like that. You know, hate seems to be
Yeah.
like the right thing to do or the right thing to feel in those
Yeah.
moments. I mean, there's nothing wrong with feeling that, especially when people are being that cruel, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah. But of course, Christianity has been telling you and teaching you all your life that that's sinful. So now you're bad again. It's your fault again, you know.
Yeah. It was always my fault. You know, if I tried to stick up for myself, it was still my fault. If I cried about it, it was still my fault. If I accepted it, it was still my fault. And
Yeah.
um yeah, I was just like nothing is good enough. There's no right response because in some way you're still sinning.
So what helped you through these times? You went through some of the most traumatic things that a person can go through in life, and you're still here today and you're sharing your story. What helped you through all of that?
I think just remaining true to myself and I don't know. For me, I've just always had a very strong perseverance and a will to survive. And I think part of what helped me get through it is I wanted to see the satisfaction. I wanted to feel the satisfaction of being successful in my life in spite of all these people. Like for me, that was kind of my ultimate revenge. Is like, I'm going to live and I'm going to be loved by somebody and I'm going to have a great career. And I'm going to do all of this in spite of all of you people telling me that no one will ever love me.
Yeah.
And in spite of all you people telling me that I'm worthless.
And when you say be true to yourself, what does that mean?
I never, even though I did try at times to fit in, I still knew who I was on the inside. I didn't pretend to be somebody I wasn't. Like, I still knew that I was a non-binary person, and I still rejected and questioned traditions. And I was just myself.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can only be me. I can't be somebody else. So I'm just going to be me and be unapologetic.
Yeah. And so you were a very strict Catholic. You lived a very strict Catholic life, as a growing up, but now you consider yourself an atheist. Was there a moment you realized that you were an atheist, or was it a progression over time that brought you to that conclusion?
Yeah, it was a progression. After that last event with that boyfriend I had, my grandmother passed away, and my grandmother lived with us. She lived with my parents and I, so she was a constant in my life for 22 years, and she was gone one day.
Wow.
And that's when I started having the fear of death. Like, as a Christian, I never grasped death because there was always that certainty of an eternity one way or the other. It was either going to be an eternity in hell or an eternity in heaven. But after she died, all of a sudden I started having these panic attacks about, like, what if I die and that's just it?
Wow.
And everything stops and it's just black and I don't wake up again, and like I'm nothing. Like I'm not going to be remembered for anything. It's done. That's just the end of life.
So it started to make you really panicky thinking about that.
Yeah, that certainty of an eternity wasn't there anymore.
So that sometimes drives people back to religion. So
yeah,
what did it do for you? Did it make you feel more religious in that moment, or did it drive you away? And if it did, how so?
It kind of drove me back in the sense that I was like, okay, well, maybe I should make my life right with God, but I didn't want to do it through a church. And ironically, I was one of these Christians who had never read the Bible. Because the Catholic Church, at least the one I went to, didn't really encourage individuals to read the Bible. They believed that only a priest was the person who is allowed to interpret the Bible for people. Like, only the priest understands. You could not possibly understand. So I just never read it. So I've had a couple Bibles that were gifted to me. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to start reading this from the beginning. And that's kind of when Christianity just shot itself in the foot. Because from page 1 of Genesis, I'm like, this is obvious fiction. There's no way any of this is real. Like, this is just like reading a fairy tale. Like, so-and-so lived for 900 years. I'm like, without any modern medicine? That makes no sense. Like, people today don't live that long.
Pretty ridiculous. If you're looking at it from an objective viewpoint, it's really obviously fictional. Yeah. But when we're raised with it, we are just told, well, yeah, it happened. And for some reason we accept that,
Yeah.
Yeah. So reading the Bible was kind of maybe not the last straw, but one of the last straws for you that kind of solidified, this is all made up.
I think, that was pretty much the last straw for me, was trying to read the Bible. I'm like, this isn't real. Like, this is obviously written by people. this isn't the word of God. But I still didn't get rid of, like, I didn't let go of my belief in God at that point.
Yeah.
But definitely, like, okay, the Bible is not inerrant and it's not the word of God. It is just a book that is pretty entertaining if you're into dark fiction. And that's about it.
That's a good way to put it. If you're into dark fiction, the Bible's the book
Yeah.
for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Bill Maher referred to it as the old book of Jewish fairy tales.
Yeah.
I always thought that
Yeah.
was
Like
funny.
Noah's Ark, like,
Yeah.
there's no way that worked. Like,
I know.
snakes don't talk. Yeah.
There's this really funny meme that I posted online one time, and I saw it on this, like, it's a atheist Facebook page, I think, and it had a picture of a lion, and the lion is incredibly, like, fat. He's been eating a lot, clearly, right? And he's in the foreground of the photo, and in the background it's the ark, the
Yeah.
Noah's Ark, and it says, shitty cruise, great buffet. So, I mean, if there's a lion on
Yeah.
the ark, the lion's going to have a really great time.
Yeah, definitely.
Just the silly idea that, like, the lions and the predators on the boat were just chilling, that God just, like, gave them, like, really relaxed feelings so they didn't eat other animals. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
silly
of
to
course,
even try to explain that it's ridiculous.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
of
feel
course,
silly.
like, I'm also reading, I'm like, well, where did the dinosaurs fit in here? And, like, if God did create dinosaurs, surely he wasn't dumb enough to put humans on Earth the same time the dinosaurs were around, because we'd all be gone.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's true.
like, there's
Velociraptors
just
would
no
have
way.
us, yeah. That would be really hard
Yeah,
to survive.
definitely. Like, there's no hiding. Like, some 40-ton giant lizard comes walking around, you're not safe anywhere. Like,
There's a guy online I love his Facebook picture. I don't know if he listens to this podcast or not. He's in a bunch of the groups, but first name is Rex, and he has I think that may be a fake name or something. I don't know. But anyway, that's what his name is on Facebook. And his profile picture is Jesus. It's one of these pictures of Jesus, like one of these paintings where Jesus is holding, I think he's usually holding a lamb or something.
okay.
And in this case, he's holding what looks like a velociraptor, and the velociraptor looks really sad, and the caption is, "There's no room in the ark," or something like that.
Oh my
Like,
God.
Jesus is consoling this poor dinosaur, sorry.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That's how the dinosaurs were extinct. They just drowned in the flood.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
I've pieced it
Yeah.
together. Okay. That's how it happened. Yeah. Just makes me laugh. So I wanted to ask you something that I had a really hard time with at first when I deconverted was coping with the finality of death. How have you processed that since deconverting?
That's kind of when I finally actually went and got some real mental health help. I knew I had depression from a young age, and I'd been struggling with it. And anytime I try to get help, it was always kind of like this whole, we'll just give it to God, and it's just a phase. You'll grow out of it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, all the times I've prayed and attempted to give it to God, nothing happened because prayer doesn't work. And it definitely isn't a phase because it's still here. After my grandmother died, I was going through a really tough time with my mental illness. And then at the same time, my best friend at the time, him and I had a really bad falling out, and we're no longer friends. So I became really, really depressed, like to the point where I wasn't functional anymore. I wasn't taking care of myself. I couldn't really form a sentence. And all I wanted to do was just kind of give up living. So I finally was like, you know what? I think I need to get help.
Yeah.
And I started seeing a psychologist. And through that, that's kind of how I got over my fear of death.
Wow.
Like, I brought it up to him, and he's like, well, what if that's all that it is? Like, what if you die and that's just it? Like, we're all going to die. So what's the most important thing is to just have the best life you can now, and have the best quality of life you can now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I got over that fear.
That's cool. I appreciate you sharing that because I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of Christians to get over when they deconvert and become non-Christian or atheist, or especially when we're atheist or agnostic and we don't think there's an eternity to follow. I
Yeah.
think for other religions or people who keep a spiritual belief, they kind of hold on to this. Well, maybe we last forever. But for us, there is no happy ending in that sense. So I think, like many people say, it's not about the ending, it's about the journey. It's about enjoying and making the most of what you have now. And so I think that's really great advice for people who maybe are still struggling with that. I think I occasionally still have a hard time with it, but I think this kind of thinking is really positive and really helpful, and it helps keep us focused in the moment and trying to make the most of our relationships and our life now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
And especially, yeah, I can't stress enough to people like quality of life. Like the quality of your life matters. Like your life should be happy, it should be healthy, it should be spent doing the things you love with the people you love. It should not be spent with toxic influences and toxic people and toxic belief systems holding you back from being who you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long have you considered yourself an atheist?
Not super long. Um, I think after I started getting help, I still remained pretty spiritual. I still believed in God and I still believed in Jesus, but I just didn't believe in an eternity. I didn't believe in the Bible, and it just kind of gradually progressed from
Yeah.
there, I guess, like very, very slowly. And finally, I'm just like, you know what? I just don't think any of this is real. Like, there's
Yeah.
just no evidence to support that it's real. And, you know, it's very possible we'll die and we'll find that there's something, but we just don't know. And I
Right.
think it's okay to just say we don't know.
Yeah, that's a really awesome message too. I've been hearing that from people lately, or I've been reading it, and just I think one of the people I interviewed recently for the podcast said, I learned to be okay with not knowing something, that it's okay to not know the answer. You know,
Yeah,
I think as Christians, we're told this is the answer to every question in life. It's in the Bible. There's an answer for
definitely.
everything. And then you find out as you get older, the world's not black and white. There aren't,
Hmm.
there's so much gray area, and just learning to be okay with the unknown and just accepting, yeah, we're never gonna find out how the Big Bang started, or some of these mysteries that are really interesting, maybe to me or to other people, that we're just never gonna know certain things, not just scientific stuff, but just anything. There's a lot of mysteries in
Yeah,
life, and it's okay to not know, and it's okay to
definitely.
look into it and learn more, and it's okay to say, I don't know, and I don't really care, and
Yeah,
I heard someone call, people who are not worried about religion don't really want to talk about it anymore. They're agnostic, or they're atheist now, and they're apatheistic. I heard someone say apatheistic. I thought that was pretty funny.
yeah. I would say like 2019 is when I finally decided to say I wasn't a Christian.
Yeah, that's
And
really recently.
yeah, and when I still, even though I still believed in God at the time, I was like, okay, well, if this Christian God is real, and now he's going to be losing one of his children, and I'm saying, okay, I doubt you now, I doubt this faith now, I don't think I am part of it. I'm like, surely there's going to be some type of existential feeling. Like, I'm going to like feel some type of like grief or fear, or there's going to be some kind of sign that tries to pull me back to my faith. And
Yeah,
instead, I just felt really fucking relieved.
that's
Like,
cool.
I didn't feel like I know some people do really kind of go through a mourning process when they leave, which is pretty normal because you've been indoctrinated with this your whole life. But for me,
Right.
it was like, wow, I don't need to believe in this anymore. Like, I can just be myself and like throw all this in the trash and be free. And I'm like, this just feels great. Like, I don't have to follow the script anymore.
That's awesome. For someone who had such a judgmental, horrible fear fear mongering God, or just a God who
Yeah.
is so judgmental and cruel and mean and scary and made you feel guilty and all this. Yeah, leaving him behind would be a huge relief. I think that's awesome. It made you
Yeah.
feel better about life, about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
I also like I had this huge fear of like demons and demonic stuff and satanic satanic imagery, and like now that I'm not a Christian, like there was a show on Netflix that was pretty popular for a while. It was the remake of Sabrina, and
Oh,
there's like
okay.
all sorts of satanic, like these people are Satanists, and they show like the Baphomet version of Satan, and they're saying like praise Satan, and instead of saying go to hell, they're like go to heaven. And
That's
like
funny.
in the past, this kind of stuff would have terrified me because I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
they're showing Satanism. Like, oh, I'm gonna go to hell. Satan's gonna walk up into my room and take me to hell right then and now because I saw this. And when that didn't happen, I'm like, this is kind of edgy. Like, this is kind of funny.
Yeah.
I like this. And like
Yeah.
letting go
That's
of the
cool.
Satan fear really did it for me. I'm like, well, now that there's no reason to fear hell and Satan isn't real, because surely if he was, he would have been knocking on my window by now, then there's really no reason to believe God,
Yeah.
because that was technically his nemesis. And well, he created Satan, but Satan isn't real, so therefore God probably isn't either.
Yeah, that's really funny. I'm imagining when you were talking earlier about you leaving leaving God behind. It's I just had this image of like a woman leaving her husband and walking out the door and saying like, I'm leaving. Okay, I'm really going now. And God's
Yes.
just like laying on the couch, like, totally couldn't care less, doesn't even say anything,
Yeah.
and
It was
that's
so much
funny.
like that.
He doesn't do
I was
anything.
like, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
no,
let's
don't
like
go.
look at these. Yeah, my friend kind of started, one of my friends who was never raised with religion, she started getting into Wicca. And of course we're told like, oh, that's witchcraft. You're gonna go to hell for witchcraft. That's a sin. I'm
Right.
like, I'm gonna start looking at this occult stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, well surely like I'm gonna like start getting some weird satanic malevolent feeling that I'm doing something evil here, and it didn't
Right.
happen. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. Like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't need to, like, I'm like, all right, God, if you're here, like, I'm doing witchcraft now, like, you can say something. And nothing happened.
Yeah, it's fun to think about watching scary movies now, because one of my previous guests, she mentioned, I think it was Abby, she mentioned that when she watches horror movies now, she likes horror movies, that now she can watch them and enjoy them, and she doesn't have to believe that they're nonfiction. She doesn't have to believe they're real now. She could just enjoy them for for what
Yeah,
they are. She just, oh no, she
yeah,
said, I now I can watch horror movies and I know they're not a documentary.
exactly. Yeah.
So it's so
Yeah,
funny.
I'm not a huge horror fan because I'm a bit of a chicken shit, especially with jump scares. But, like,
Yeah, yeah, they can
at the
be.
very least now, like, I know, like, the whole demon thing is made up. And so I'm
Yeah,
like, yeah, it's fake. It's good.
yeah. It's funny because I always think it's always people. I know this is not going to be the most convincing argument, but people who believe in it, they're the ones who always see demons. And the people who don't
Yeah,
believe in demons, we never see them. And I know that
exactly.
as Christian, I thought, well, what I was taught was Satan's given up on you, or Satan doesn't have to fight to like I don't
Hmm.
know. God, like he's not worried because you already are going to hell, so he's gonna like try to scare the Christians or something. I don't know. It's just
Yeah,
weird.
it's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to ask, now that you are, now that you are not a Christian, is there something that you've learned or experienced that you may not have if you had stayed a Christian?
Yeah, I've become a lot more progressive in my thinking. I used to be one of those anti-feminist, anti-gay marriage, extremely pro-life people. And now I'm going to Pride Fest and I'm embracing my LGBT identity. I'm understanding what feminism actually is. I'm pro choice. I think it's just taught me to be more empathetic towards all people and understand that situations and people's lives aren't black and white.
Yeah. So I last night watched with my wife the Pray Away documentary on Netflix. Have you seen that yet?
I have not, no.
Yeah, you made me think of it because you said you were anti-gay marriage, but then you now identify as LGBT. So
Yeah.
so that's an interesting transition, and this Pray Away documentary is about the people who were they were the ex-gay community in Christianity,
Oh, yeah.
and several of them, many of them, end up being what they call ex-gay in the documentary, and talking about their experience and how they were genuine. They really thought they were doing the right thing by trying to suppress their feelings and suppress
Hmm.
their sinful feelings of being gay. And so it was somewhat sad to see, this process, but also kind of hopeful. So it was interesting. So yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, it's good to
I
watch.
always feel like very bad for those people because I'm sure like, they really truly like believed that they're who they were as a person was inherently wrong, but that wasn't their choice to be born that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I totally get the trying to suppress who you are to
Did
try
you?
to please God in a way.
Yeah. So when you were anti-gay marriage, did you ever have feelings inside like, but maybe I kind of feel that I'm non-binary now. I feel I'm not. Did you ever, or were you just completely ignoring those feelings?
Yeah, well, yeah, I knew about that I didn't want to be a girl when I was very young, and I knew my first crush I ever had was on another girl, and yeah, pretty much decided that I was going to be very cisgender and very heterosexual.
Yeah.
I just basically just I was like, yeah, well, I was just a kid and I didn't know any better, and no, I'm really just a female who only likes men.
So how would you describe yourself now? So you said that you've never felt like a girl. So do you identify as a man, or do you identify as transgender, or what would be the proper term? And I apologize if this question is awkward, or I'm not sure how
No,
to
not at
ask. I don't
all.
want to be offensive. So
Yeah, I just identify as a person.
yeah.
Non-binary is just kind of like not really fitting into like either the man or the woman um, gender. I'm just myself.
I like that answer. Yeah. I'm a human being.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
I'm like,
good.
don't ask me about my junk. I'm just a person.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Do you use different pronouns?
yeah. I've recently started using they them pronouns.
They, them. Okay. Okay, so let's see. What is something when you look back, now you're a, uh, let's see, how can I put this? You're a very proud LGBT person. You're pro-feminist. You are an atheist. You are so different from the probably guilt-ridden Catholic that you were growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've gone through an enormous change, but there's always something really positive about yourself that you can look back at and see that was a part of who you were when you were young and is still part of who you are today. What is that thing for you?
My perseverance, definitely. Just not willing to give up and doing what I had to do to achieve my goals in life.
That's cool. Yeah, so just being a fighter.
Yeah, being a fighter for sure.
Yeah, yeah, you went through some crazy, really difficult stuff. So to have come out of that is really awesome, and I'm glad that you were able to make it through all that.
Thank you.
Okay, so for other people who are listening to the podcast now who've recently deconverted or are in the process of deconverting, who maybe had a similar experiences to yours, what kind of encouragement or what piece of guidance would you give that person?
Um, my guidance would definitely be to be true to themselves. Definitely keep questioning. If you're going through a mental health crisis, do not seek help from kind of religious authority. Definitely seek it through a medical professional, who's going to actually get you real help and not tell you that it's your fault. And what really helped me is just really walking away from church and like starting to read other perspectives, like finding other resources to kind of determine my beliefs. Like I found the Satanic Temple and I became a Satanist. um, I started listening to a podcast about Satanism, Hail Satan podcast, that was very, very informative about explaining to people what Satanism really is, because it's not a bunch of people worshiping the devil, because we
Yeah,
don't even believe he's real. And
that's pretty funny.
I found this podcast. I found there's an ex-Christian subreddit, and there is good Facebook groups for like religious trauma. And um, that one person who was on your podcast, she had a former fundamentalist group. I joined that.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, there's resources out there, and I think definitely learning that you're not going through it alone, because it's really crazy to see how many people this religion has affected negatively. And it can feel at times that you're the only one, because everybody's putting on a face that they're happy in this, but
Yes.
really it's harmed millions of people out there. And it's harmed even more since its inception. Like when we look at the Crusades, when we look at World War II and the Holocaust and the church's involvement in that, when we look at the residential schools in Canada more recently, when
Yeah.
that started coming out, like this faith has hurt so many. And it's definitely good to know that you're not alone and you're not wrong for feeling that this is not something you want to be believing in.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's so important for people to remember. I was thinking that with social media, we know we're learning, it's so bad because you see everybody's happy side and their vacations and their birthdays and their happy moments all on Facebook and every other social media thing. And church has been that for so many of us. It was like the social media effect. You see all these happy people worshiping God, and they had a hard time, but God brought them through it. I mean, everything seems to
Yeah.
always be going well, and
Yeah. It's
it's
always
not
a
true.
miracle.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yep.
always a miracle. It's never real life. It's always very fairy tale-esque, and it's just not how life works.
If it seems too good to be true, probably is.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there anything that we haven't got to talk about, or that we didn't get to discuss that maybe you wanted to touch on or mention?
Um, yeah. Yeah, I guess some detail things for sure.
Yeah, well, go for it. Yeah, I didn't want to. I wanted to make sure I asked you about the important things in your story. So if there's something that we didn't get to talk about, Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. In that non-denominational church, I started kind of knowing it wasn't going to be a good fit for me, because, like I mentioned earlier, like they want you to not be part of the world. And so, I was working a part-time job. I was going to school, and at the time, my major was undecided, but I knew I was going to be in healthcare. And so I was working at a hospital in food service part-time. And because of my school schedule, that meant working weekends and usually Sundays. And so because of my job, I ended up missing church. And it's like after I missed like 2 Sundays, the pastor was emailing me, like questioning why I wasn't at church.
Oh,
And
and
it's
it
like,
was because
well,
of
I'm working. So I'm not allowed to have a job that requires me to work weekends. Like sick people don't stop being sick on Sundays, so I kind of have to be there.
yeah.
And yeah, it was and they really didn't believe that I was a Christian at all. Like even though I told them like I used to be Catholic, and I've always been a Christian, but I would like to join this church. Like they basically acted like, yeah, you're not a Christian, you don't know anything about Jesus, you don't know anything about God. Like they treated me like I had no knowledge
Like you were an
of the
idiot.
Christian faith. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I felt that was very condescending. And
totally.
my one friend who brought me to the church, I don't think she was very involved when we were in high school, because we would be listening to the Kesha music, who they of course say is a Satanist, and
Oh no,
all
that's
this
really
stuff.
funny.
But it was around that time like the 50 Shades of Grey book started getting all this hype, and I'm like, well, I need to see what this is about. So I wanted to read this book because I'm like, I need to understand what everyone's talking about. And then my friend basically was like, well, if you read this book, this is the devil's book. Like, you are going to go to hell if you read this book. Like, this is a sin. And if you read this book, I'm not going to be your friend anymore.
Wow.
So she ended her friendship because I read 50 Shades of Grey. And
Oh,
she cut me out of her life the minute I stopped going to church.
it just shows you where
And
that
yeah, it's like,
maybe they didn't really care about you as much as they acted like it.
basically, it's like they only cared to have you in your life, to have you in their life if you were as Christian as they were.
Yeah.
And if you fell short of that, then you weren't good enough anymore.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of what I found with some of my old Christian friends. Um, they just drop off the face of the earth. I mean, like, or you do, we do. I don't know. You just never hear from them again. It's so bizarre with they talk such a big game about being your brother's keeper and being being coming alongside your brother or sister in Christ and supporting them through difficult times. But yeah, they're nowhere to be seen when things get tough.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
there's never any empathy. And if you question your faith, it's like, oh, well, you're going to hell. I want nothing to do
Yeah.
with you. I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to try to make you see why you should stay in the faith. They're just like, okay, bye.
As long as the
Like,
answer is always Jesus, they're cool with helping you. But the moment that
yeah,
maybe the answer isn't Jesus, you're the problem and they're gonna leave.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Or, as long as the only thing they need to do to help you is thoughts and prayers, that's good.
You mentioned some really great resources, the Reddit resource, and then the anti-fundamentalist Facebook group. Are there any other
Mhm.
resources that you think would be good for people to know about?
Um, yeah, oddly enough, I haven't done a ton of reading. Like, I know a lot of people have read like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. So, I mean, I definitely do want to read those. So I'm probably going to check them out. Um, there is this guy on YouTube. What's his name? It's like skeptical. He's like an atheist YouTuber, and I
Okay.
started watching him. And he used to be like go to evangelical school, and he went to a Christian college and all this stuff, and then he decided he was an atheist. And
Mm.
hearing his testimony was really helpful to me.
That's cool. So if you think of it or find out what channel that is, will you just email me and let me know, and then I'll pop it into the notes, the show notes of the episode.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah. Anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to mention?
I think I got a lot of the major points.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's a way for people to get in touch with you, what would be the best way for people to do that?
I'd just say through email, definitely.
Okay. And do you want me to just put your email in the notes so people, if they want to email you, they can find it that way?
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Well, Bella, your story was really, really sad at times and very traumatic, and there were some really horrible things you went through. And again, I mean this sincerely. That I'm really glad that you made it through, that you're here, and what's even more awesome on top of getting through all of that is you're sharing your story so that other people who might be going through something similar can find some encouragement and some hope. And I think that's super awesome that you're doing that. So thank you for taking time out of your weekend to share your story and give other people hope.
Definitely. Like, I always did want to share what happened, but there's always been that fear factor of, not wanting to open up. And, but yeah, definitely in spite of everything that I went through, I I definitely met that goal I had of persevering because of it. I graduated college and became a surgical tech. I found the love of my life. Like, so despite all these terrible things, it seemed that getting rid of all that toxicity in my life was the answer. And it just happened to be that one of those toxic things was religion.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks again, Bella, and I hope it was really nice to meet you, and I hope that you have a really nice remainder of your weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Join us next time by following or subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.